The woman stumbled through the rocky mountain pass, her brother's limp body draped across her back, and she knew with absolute certainty that if she stopped moving they would both die here in the Colorado wilderness. Rebecca Vaughn's legs burned with exhaustion as she pushed forward through the narrow trail, her brother Thomas growing heavier with each step. The summer of 1875 had brought a brutal heat wave even to these mountain elevations, but Thomas shivered against her back, despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. She had been carrying him for 3 hours since their horse had thrown a shoe and bolted, leaving them stranded 15 miles from the nearest settlement. Thomas had taken ill 2 days prior with a fever that refused to break, and Rebecca had made the desperate decision to seek help in Redding, a mining town she had heard was nestled somewhere in these mountains. Her boot caught on a root, and she nearly went down, catching herself at the last second. Thomas moaned softly, his head lolling against her shoulder. At 19 years old, Thomas was nearly 6 feet tall and weighed considerably more than her own slight frame could reasonably bear, but Rebecca refused to leave him. Their parents had died from cholera the previous winter, and Thomas was all the family she had left in this world. "Hold on," she whispered, though she was not sure if he could hear her anymore. "Just hold on." The trail curved around a massive boulder, and Rebecca's vision swam with exhaustion. She could feel her knees threatening to buckle, her muscles trembling with the strain. She had not eaten since yesterday morning, and the canteen at her hip had been empty for the past hour. The situation was dire, and she knew it. Pride had no place in survival. That was when she saw him. The man stood perhaps 30 yards ahead, emerging from a side trail that led higher into the mountains. He was the largest human being Rebecca had ever laid eyes on. Easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His hair was dark brown, falling past his shoulders in thick waves, and a beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin trousers and a simple linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. A rifle was slung across his back, and he carried a string of rabbits in one massive hand. The mountain man stopped dead when he saw her, his eyes widening slightly. Rebecca tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a croak. "Please," she managed, and then her legs finally gave out. She was falling, Thomas still strapped to her back, and she braced herself for the impact with the rocky ground. Instead, powerful arms caught her before she hit the earth. The mountain man had crossed the distance between them with shocking speed, and now he held both her and Thomas as though they weighed nothing at all. "Easy now," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "I have got you." Rebecca looked up into the man's face and found herself staring into eyes the color of storm clouds. There was concern there, and something else she could not quite name. His face was weathered from years in the sun and wind, with deep lines around his eyes that suggested he was perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s. "My brother," Rebecca said weakly. "He is sick. Fever. I need to get him to a doctor." The mountain man carefully eased Thomas off her back, cradling the young man in his arms as though he were a child. He pressed the back of his hand to Thomas's forehead and frowned. "Nearest doctor is in Redding, and that is a half-day's journey from here," he said. "Your brother needs help now." "My cabin is just over that ridge. I have some medical supplies and knowledge. We need to get his fever down." Rebecca wanted to protest, to say that she needed to get Thomas to a proper doctor, but the world was tilting dangerously, and she found she could not form words. The mountain man seemed to notice her distress because he shifted Thomas to one arm and wrapped his other arm around Rebecca's waist, supporting her weight effortlessly. "Can you walk?" he asked gently. Rebecca nodded, though she was not entirely certain it was true. With his support, however, she found she could manage to put one foot in front of the other. The mountain man moved slowly, matching her pace while carrying Thomas in his other arm. Rebecca was amazed by his strength. Thomas was not a small man, and yet this stranger carried him as easily as another man might carry a sack of flour. The ridge was steeper than it had looked, and Rebecca had to stop twice to catch her breath. Each time, the mountain man waited patiently, never once complaining or showing any sign of strain despite his burden. Finally, they crested the top, and Rebecca saw the cabin below. It was larger than she had expected, built from thick logs and nestled in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. A stream ran nearby, and she could hear the musical sound of water over rocks. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, suggesting the mountain man had left a fire burning before going hunting. "Watch your step here," the mountain man said, guiding her down a narrow path. "The rocks can be treacherous." They reached the cabin, and he kicked the door open with his boot, carrying Thomas inside. The interior was surprisingly well kept, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and handmade furniture arranged around the single large room. A loft was visible above, presumably where the mountain man slept. He carried Thomas to a bed built into the far wall and laid him down gently. "Sit," he told Rebecca, pointing to a chair near the fireplace. When she hesitated, he added, "You are no good to your brother if you collapse. Sit." The authority in his voice left no room for argument. Rebecca sank into the chair, grateful to be off her feet. The mountain man moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, gathering supplies. He poured water from a pitcher into a basin and carried it to the bedside, then retrieved several cloth strips from a trunk. "My name is Benjamin Walsh," he said as he worked, soaking the cloths in the cool water. "Folks call me Ben." "Rebecca Vaughn," she replied. "That is my brother Thomas." Ben nodded, placing the cool cloths on Thomas's forehead and neck. "How long has he had the fever?" "2 days. It started suddenly. We were traveling to Reading to find work. I thought perhaps it was just exhaustion from the journey, but it has only gotten worse." Ben unbuttoned Thomas's shirt and placed more cloths on his chest. "Has he been drinking water when he can?" "He has been slipping in and out of consciousness since this morning." Ben's expression was grave. "That is not good. Dehydration can kill as surely as fever." He went to a shelf and took down several jars, examining their contents before selecting one. He mixed some dried herbs into a cup of water, creating a murky tea. "This will help bring down the fever. Willow bark and feverfew. My mother taught me the recipe." He lifted Thomas's head gently and managed to get some of the tea down his throat. Thomas coughed weakly but swallowed. Ben repeated the process patiently until most of the cup was empty. "Now we wait," Ben said, turning his attention to Rebecca. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning." Ben made a disapproving sound in his throat and went to the fireplace, where a pot hung over the coals. He ladled something into a bowl and brought it to her. "Venison stew. Eat slowly or you will make yourself sick." Rebecca took the bowl with trembling hands. The smell alone made her stomach clench with hunger. She took a small spoonful and nearly wept at the taste. The stew was rich and hearty, full of meat and vegetables. She forced herself to eat slowly as Ben had instructed, though every instinct screamed at her to devour it. While she ate, Ben moved between her and Thomas, checking on the young man's condition and replacing the cooling cloths with fresh ones. Rebecca watched him work and marveled at how gentle such a large man could be. His hands, which looked capable of crushing stone, moved with careful precision as he tended to Thomas. "You live up here alone?" Rebecca asked between spoonfuls of stew. "I do," Ben replied. "Have for the past 5 years. I trap and hunt, Sell the furs in Reading a few times a year. It is a quiet life, but it suits me. Why did you leave civilization? Ben was quiet for a moment, and Rebecca worried she had overstepped. But then he spoke, his voice thoughtful. I was a soldier during the war, fought for the Union. When it was over, I found I could not settle back into regular life. Too many memories, too much noise. I came west looking for peace and found it in these mountains. Rebecca understood more than he probably realized. She had been only a child during the war, but she remembered the soldiers returning to her small town in Kansas, hollow-eyed and changed. Her own father had fought, though he spoke of it rarely and only in troubled whispers. I am grateful you found us, she said softly. I do not know what would have happened if you had not come along. Ben met her eyes, and she saw something flicker in those gray depths. I am glad I did too. The afternoon wore on into evening. Thomas's fever remained high despite Ben's treatments, and Rebecca could see the concern growing in the mountain man's expression. He brewed more tea and managed to get Thomas to swallow it, then changed the cooling cloths again. Will he be all right? Rebecca asked, unable to keep the fear from her voice. I have seen men survive worse fevers, Ben said, but his tone was guarded. The next few hours will tell. If we can get his fever to break by morning, he should recover. And if it does not break, Ben did not answer immediately. Then we will deal with that when the time comes. For now, we keep him cool and hydrated and pray. Rebecca stood and went to her brother's bedside. Thomas looked so pale, so vulnerable. She took his hand and was alarmed by how hot his skin felt. Thomas, you have to fight this, she whispered. You have to hold on. Ben came to stand beside her, and his presence was oddly comforting. Tell me about him, he said. About your family. Rebecca appreciated the distraction. She told him about growing up in Kansas, about their parents who had worked a small farm until the cholera outbreak. She talked about Thomas's dreams of becoming a blacksmith, about how they had sold everything to make this journey west in search of new opportunities. We heard there was work in the mining towns, she said. Thomas is strong and not afraid of hard labor. I thought perhaps I could find work cooking or cleaning. We just needed a fresh start. Ben listened without interruption, occasionally checking on Thomas. As Rebecca spoke, she found herself studying him more closely. Despite his rugged appearance, there was an intelligence in his eyes that suggested a man who had once been educated. His speech was more refined than she would have expected from a mountain hermit, with only occasional roughness creeping in. You are different from what I would have imagined a mountain man to be, she said. A hint of amusement touched Ben's bearded face. What did you imagine? Someone more rough, I suppose, less articulate. I was a school teacher before the war, Ben admitted, in a small town in Pennsylvania. That life seems like a dream now, something that happened to a different person. Do you ever miss it? Sometimes, but I do not regret leaving. Every man must find his own path. Darkness fell and Ben lit several oil lamps, bathing the cabin in warm, golden light. He prepared more stew for both of them, though Rebecca found she had little appetite despite her earlier hunger. Worry over Thomas consumed her thoughts. Ben seemed to sense her distress because he pulled his chair close to hers and spoke in low, soothing tones about life in the mountains. He told her about the changing seasons, about the wildlife that roamed these slopes, about the quiet beauty of a snowfall when you were the only human for miles around. His voice was hypnotic, and Rebecca found herself relaxing slightly despite her fear. Around midnight, Thomas stirred and opened his eyes. They were glassy with fever but aware. Rebecca, he croaked. She was at his side instantly. I am here, Thomas. I am right here. Where are we? We are safe. A kind man helped us. You have been very sick. Thomas tried to sit up, but Ben was there, gently pressing him back down. Easy, son, you need to rest. Who are you? Thomas asked, squinting up at Ben. My name is Benjamin Walsh. You are in my cabin. Your sister has been taking good care of you, but you need to stay still and let the medicine work. Thomas seemed to accept this, his eyes already drifting closed again. Within moments he was back asleep, but his breathing seemed slightly easier than before. That is a good sign, Ben said. He is fighting it. Rebecca felt tears prick at her eyes, relief overwhelming her. She had been holding herself together through sheer force of will, and now that will threaten to crumble. Ben must have seen it because he placed a large, warm hand on her shoulder. He is strong, Ben said. He will pull through. Rebecca nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They kept their vigil through the night, taking turns checking on Thomas and dozing in the chairs by the fire. Whenever Rebecca woke, she found Ben alert and watchful, his rifle within easy reach. The gesture made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her father died. Dawn broke gray and cool, the morning mist rolling down from the higher peaks. Rebecca woke stiff from sleeping in the chair and immediately looked toward the bed. Thomas was still asleep, but when she touched his forehead she gasped. Ben, she called, his fever, it has broken. Ben came quickly, checking Thomas for himself. A genuine smile split his bearded face, transforming his stern features. You are right, the worst has passed. Rebecca felt her knees go weak with relief. Ben caught her again, steadying her with those impossibly strong arms. For a moment they stood like that, her hands pressed against his chest, his arms around her waist. Rebecca became acutely aware of the heat radiating from his body, of the solid muscle beneath her palms, of the way his eyes had gone soft as he looked down at her. Thank you, she whispered. You saved his life. We both did, Ben replied, his voice rougher than usual. You got him this far. That took remarkable strength. They stood close for another heartbeat, and Rebecca felt something shift between them, something unspoken but powerful. Then Thomas stirred and the moment broke. Ben stepped back, clearing his throat, while Rebecca busied herself tucking the blankets around her brother. Thomas woke properly an hour later, weak but lucid. Ben helped him sit up enough to drink some broth, then more of the medicinal tea. The young man's color was already returning and his eyes were clear. I feel like I was trampled by a horse, Thomas said, his voice still raspy. That is how fever works, Ben told him. But you are on the mend now. Another day of rest and you should be much improved. A day. Thomas protested weakly. We need to get to Reading. Rebecca and I cannot impose on you. You will impose on me for as long as it takes you to recover, Ben said firmly. You are welcome to stay here until you are strong enough to travel safely. Rebecca saw Thomas about to argue and interjected. Thomas, be reasonable. You can barely sit up. We will stay until Ben says you are well enough and we will be grateful for his hospitality. Thomas subsided, though he looked unhappy about it. Ben, meanwhile, set about preparing a proper breakfast. Rebecca watched him move around the cabin with easy familiarity and found herself admiring not just his strength but his competence. This was a man who had built a life for himself in the wilderness and thrived. Over the next few days, a comfortable routine developed. Thomas continued to improve steadily under Ben's care, gaining strength hour by hour. Rebecca helped with the cooking and cleaning, feeling the need to contribute rather than simply accept charity. Ben protested at first, saying they were guests, but Rebecca insisted, and eventually he relented. She discovered she enjoyed the domestic work more than she had expected. There was something deeply satisfying about keeping the cabin tidy, about preparing meals in the simple but well-equipped kitchen area. Ben had clearly made efforts to create a real home here, not just a shelter. He had books on shelves, quality cookware, even curtains at the windows that someone had sewn with care. Did you make these? Rebecca asked, touching the curtains. Ben looked up from where he was sharpening his knife by the fire. My mother sent them. She still writes to me occasionally, hoping I will return to civilization. The curtains were her way of civilizing my cabin by proxy. Rebecca smiled. She must miss you. I miss her too, but I send money when I can and letters. She knows I am well. As Thomas grew stronger, he began spending time sitting up and talking with Ben. The two men discovered a shared interest in carpentry and blacksmithing, and Ben showed Thomas some of the furniture he had built for the cabin. Thomas was impressed by the quality of the work, and soon they were deep in discussions about joinery and metalwork techniques. Rebecca found herself drawn to watching Ben as he spoke with her brother. There was patience in him, a willingness to teach and share knowledge. He treated Thomas with respect, man to man, even though Thomas was clearly the younger and less experienced of the two. It spoke to a fundamental decency in Ben's character. One afternoon, while Thomas was napping and Rebecca was washing clothes in the stream, Ben came to join her. He carried his own laundry, insisting he could not let her do all the work. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the sound of the water and birdsong filling the air. Rebecca was intensely aware of his presence beside her, of the way his muscled arms moved as he scrubbed fabric against stone. She had never been the type to swoon over men, had always been too practical for such nonsense, but something about Benjamin Walsh made her heart beat faster. I want to thank you again, she said, breaking the silence, for everything you have done for us. You do not need to keep thanking me, Ben replied. Any decent person would have helped. I am not so sure about that. The world can be cruel, especially to strangers. Ben was quiet for a moment, wringing water from a shirt. I suppose that is true. I have seen the worst of humanity, but I have also seen the best. I choose to believe there is more good than bad, even when evidence suggests otherwise. That is a beautiful philosophy. It is the only way I can make sense of things. He paused, then added, You remind me of that good, Rebecca. You and Thomas both. The way you refused to give up on him, the determination it must have taken to carry him through those mountains. That is the kind of strength the world needs more of. Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer sun. I only did what any sister would do. No, Ben said firmly. You did what a remarkable woman would do. Do not diminish that. Their eyes met and held. Rebecca saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch, a hunger that went beyond the physical. He looked at her as though she was something precious, something to be treasured. No man had ever looked at her that way before. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Ben cleared his throat and returned to his washing, and Rebecca did the same, though her hands trembled slightly. That evening, with Thomas feeling well enough to sit at the table, Ben prepared a feast. He roasted a young deer he had brought down that morning, along with wild vegetables and fresh bread he baked in a Dutch oven. The smell filled the cabin and made Rebecca's mouth water. You are an excellent cook, she told him as they ate. Where did you learn? Necessity, mostly. When you live alone in the mountains, you either learn to cook well or you eat poorly. I chose the former. He grinned. My mother also made sure I knew my way around a kitchen before I left home. She said no son of hers would be helpless. Thomas laughed, looking more like himself than he had since taken ill. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She is, stubborn as a mule but wise. They talked late into the evening, sharing stories and learning about each other. Rebecca discovered that Ben had a quick wit and a gift for storytelling. He recounted tales of his time in the mountains, encounters with bears and mountain lions, harsh winters and beautiful summers. Thomas was enthralled, asking question after question. Rebecca mostly listened, content to watch the firelight play across Ben's features as he spoke. She was falling for him, she realized with a start. This huge, gentle man who had saved them and asked for nothing in return had somehow captured her heart without even trying. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it felt right, natural, as though she had been waiting all her life to meet someone like Benjamin Walsh. A week passed, then another. Thomas was nearly back to full strength, helping Ben with chores around the property. Rebecca had taken over most of the cooking and had organized the cabin to a degree of cleanliness that made Ben shake his head in amazement. "I had forgotten a home could look like this," he said one evening, surveying the tidy interior. "You kept it quite well for a bachelor," Rebecca countered. "I simply added some finishing touches." The truth was she did not want to leave. The cabin in the mountains had become a refuge, a place of peace and unexpected happiness. But she knew they could not impose on Ben's hospitality forever. She and Thomas needed to continue to Reading, to find work and build their lives. The thought of leaving made her chest ache. Ben seemed to sense her melancholy because he found excuses to spend time alone with her. He taught her to identify different plants and herbs in the forest, showed her the best fishing spots in the stream, took her to a high meadow where wildflowers bloomed in riotous color. Thomas, perhaps understanding more than he let on, always seemed to have something else to do when Ben suggested these outings. One afternoon, Ben led Rebecca to a spot where the trees opened up to reveal a stunning vista. Mountains stretched as far as the eye could see, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. A hawk wheeled overhead, its cry echoing across the vast emptiness. "This is why I stay," Ben said quietly. "This view, this peace. Out here I can breathe." "It is beautiful," Rebecca agreed. "I understand why you love it." They sat on a flat rock, shoulders touching, and watched the hawk hunt. Rebecca was intensely aware of every point of contact between them, of the warmth of his arm against hers. She wanted to lean into him, to feel those strong arms around her again. "Rebecca," Ben said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "These past 2 weeks, having you and Thomas here, it has reminded me what I have been missing. I thought I was content with solitude, but now I realize I was just hiding from connection, from the possibility of pain." "Ben." He turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "You have woken something in me that I thought died during the war. Hope. The belief that I could have more than just survival, that I could have a life, a real life with someone." Rebecca's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I do not want you to leave. I know you and Thomas need to get to Reading, to build your lives, but I am asking you to consider building that life here, with me." He squeezed her hands gently. "I am not a rich man. I cannot offer you fancy dresses or a house in town. But I can offer you my heart, my protection, and a home in these mountains, if you will have me." Tears sprang to Rebecca's eyes. "You truly mean that?" "I have never meant anything more in my life. Rebecca Vaughn, I am falling in love with you. Perhaps I already have fallen. I know we have only known each other a short time, but sometimes you just know. And I know that you are the woman I want to spend my life with." Rebecca felt as though her heart would burst. "I feel the same way. I have been trying not to, trying to be sensible, but Ben, I cannot help it. I love you too." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds. He pulled her close and she went willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck as his encircled her waist. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, almost reverent. Then deeper, more passionate as weeks of restrained desire found release. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ben rested his forehead against hers. "Say you will stay, please." "Yes," Rebecca whispered. "Yes, I will stay." They sat holding each other as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Rebecca had never felt so certain of anything in her life. This was where she was meant to be, with this man who had saved her brother and stolen her heart. When they returned to the cabin hand in hand, Thomas took one look at their faces and grinned. "About time you two figured it out. I was starting to think I would need to lock you in the woodshed together." Rebecca felt her face heat. "You knew." "Rebecca, I may have had fever, but I was not blind. Ben looks at you like you hung the moon, and you have been sighing like a schoolgirl for days." He stood and extended his hand to Ben. "You have my blessing, if that matters. I cannot think of a better man for my sister." Ben shook his hand firmly. "It matters a great deal. Thank you, Thomas." "Just promise me one thing," Thomas said, his expression turning serious. "Promise you will take care of her." "With my life," Ben replied without hesitation. "You have my word." Thomas nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now, when is the wedding?" "Because if you two are going to be living here together, it had better be soon. Rebecca may be headstrong, but she was raised proper." Rebecca sputtered. "Thomas!" But Ben was laughing, that deep, rumbling laugh she had come to love. "Your brother is right. I want to do this properly." "Rebecca, will you marry me? Will you be my wife?" She pretended to consider, though her answer had never been in doubt. "Well, since you asked so nicely, how can I refuse?" The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. Ben needed to go to Reading to arrange for a minister and to purchase supplies, including a proper wedding ring. Thomas insisted on going with him, wanting to scout out work opportunities and establish himself before the wedding. Rebecca stayed at the cabin, using the time to sew herself a dress suitable for marriage. The men returned after 3 days with good news. Thomas had found a position as an apprentice to the town blacksmith, a man named Gustav Peterson who was getting on in years and needed help. The pay was modest, but included lodging and meals, giving Thomas a solid foundation to build from. Ben had purchased a simple gold band for Rebecca and had arranged for the circuit minister to come to the cabin in 2 weeks' time. He had also bought fabric, which he presented to Rebecca with an almost shy expression. "I know you have been sewing your dress from what we had here, but I thought you might want something finer," he said. The fabric was beautiful, a deep blue cotton with tiny white flowers. Rebecca held it to her chest, overwhelmed. "It is perfect, thank you." She worked on the dress every spare moment, determined to have it finished in time. Ben, meanwhile, spent hours cleaning and improving the cabin, wanting everything perfect for his bride. He built a proper bed frame for the loft, installed new shelves, even constructed a rocking chair that he said was for Rebecca to use on the porch. The tenderness behind every action made Rebecca fall deeper in love with him. This gruff mountain man had depths she was only beginning to discover, and she looked forward to a lifetime of learning his secrets. The day before the wedding, Thomas pulled Rebecca aside while Ben was out hunting. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "It is a hard life up here, Rebecca. Isolated. You will be far from town, far from other women." "I am sure," Rebecca replied without hesitation. "Thomas, I have never been more certain of anything. Ben is a good man and I love him. Besides, you will be in Reading. I will not be completely without family." Thomas hugged her tightly. "I just want you to be happy." "I am. I will be. Do not worry about me. I am your older brother. Worrying about you is part of the job description." The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Rebecca woke early and bathed in the stream, washing her hair with lavender soap Ben had bought in town. She put on her new dress, which fit perfectly, and pinned her dark hair up with the few hairpins she owned. When she looked at her reflection in Ben's small mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her cheeks were flushed with happiness, her eyes bright with anticipation. Ben had been banished to the barn to get ready, tradition holding that he should not see her before the ceremony. Thomas stood guard at the cabin door, making sure Ben did not sneak a peek. The minister arrived at noon, a portly man named Reverend Collins who had made the journey up from Reading. He seemed slightly winded from the climb but smiled warmly when Rebecca greeted him. "Ben has told me a great deal about you," Reverend Collins said. "It is good to see him happy. I have known him since he first came to these parts, and I have never seen him smile the way he does when he speaks of you." The ceremony was held outside, in the clearing in front of the cabin. Wildflowers that Rebecca had picked that morning decorated the porch railing, their sweet scent perfuming the air. Thomas stood proudly beside Ben as his best man, while Rebecca had no one to give her away. She decided she did not need anyone. She was giving herself freely, choosing this life and this man of her own will. When Ben emerged from the barn, Rebecca's breath caught. He had trimmed his beard and pulled his long hair back neatly. He wore clean trousers and a new shirt, and he looked both rugged and handsome. But it was the expression on his face when he saw her that made her heart soar. He looked at her with such love, such wonder, as though he could not quite believe his good fortune. They came together in front of Reverend Collins, Ben taking both her hands in his. His hands dwarfed hers, strong and calloused from years of hard work, but infinitely gentle. Reverend Collins spoke about love and commitment, about the sanctity of marriage and the responsibilities they were undertaking. Rebecca heard the words as if from a distance, too focused on Ben's face, on the way his eyes never left hers. "Do you, Benjamin Walsh, take Rebecca Vaughn to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Ben said, his voice strong and certain. "And do you, Rebecca Vaughn, take Benjamin Walsh to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite the emotion swirling through her. Ben slipped the ring onto her finger, and she marveled at how right it looked there, as though it had always belonged. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Ben, you may kiss your bride." Ben cupped her face in his large hands and kissed her softly, sweetly, a kiss full of promise and hope. Rebecca felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. When they finally parted, Thomas was grinning like a fool, and even Reverend Collins looked misty-eyed. They celebrated with a meal Rebecca had prepared earlier, roasted venison and vegetables, and a cake she had attempted for the first time. It was slightly lopsided but tasted wonderful. Reverend Collins entertained them with stories from his circuit, and Thomas toasted the happy couple with cups of coffee, as neither Ben nor Rebecca were drinkers. As evening approached, Thomas and the Reverend prepared to head back down the mountain to Reading. Thomas embraced his sister tightly. "Be happy," he whispered. "Write to me, I will, and you take care of yourself, do not work too hard." Thomas turned to Ben and extended his hand. "Take care of her, always," Ben promised. They stood on the porch and watched Thomas and Reverend Collins disappear down the trail, headed for the valley below. When they were out of sight, Ben turned to Rebecca and swept her up into his arms, making her laugh. "What are you doing?" "Carrying my bride over the threshold," he replied, pushing open the cabin door. "It is tradition." He carried her inside and set her down gently, then pulled her close. "Hello, wife." "Hello, husband," Rebecca replied, marveling at how natural the word felt. They stood in the gathering dusk, holding each other, both aware that their life together was truly beginning. Ben had banked the fire to coals, and the cabin was warm and welcoming. He had scattered wildflowers on the bed in the loft, she noticed, another romantic gesture from her unexpectedly tender mountain man. "Are you tired?" Ben asked softly. "No," Rebecca replied, though her heart was racing. "Are you?" "Not at all." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she responded with all the love and desire she had been holding back. Ben lifted her easily and carried her up the ladder to the loft, and Rebecca thought that if this was what the rest of her life looked like, she would be the luckiest woman alive. The weeks following their marriage settled into a comfortable rhythm. Rebecca had feared she might find the isolation difficult, but instead she discovered she thrived on it. There was something deeply satisfying about the simplicity of mountain life, about knowing that everything they had was earned through their own efforts. She learned to shoot, Ben patiently teaching her to handle both the rifle and a smaller pistol he had purchased for her protection. The first time she brought down a rabbit on her own, she had whooped with joy, and Ben had picked her up and spun her around, pride evident on his face. She learned to preserve food for the coming winter, to identify which plants were edible and which were poisonous, to read the sky for coming weather. Ben was an excellent teacher, never condescending, always willing to explain things until she understood. In return, she taught him things as well. She could read music and sometimes sang as she worked, and Ben would stop whatever he was doing just to listen. She taught him to dance properly, laughing as they waltzed around the cabin floor to music only she could sing. She brought warmth and light to his previously solitary existence, and he told her often how much richer his life had become. Their love deepened with each passing day. Rebecca discovered that beneath Ben's stoic exterior was a man of deep feeling, someone who had simply learned to guard his heart after years of pain. As he grew more comfortable with her, she saw more of his playful side, the humor that lurked beneath the surface. One morning she woke to find him gone from bed, which was unusual. She descended the ladder to find him at the table, working on something. When she approached, he looked up with a sheepish expression. "I am making you something," he said, "or trying to. I am better with large furniture than delicate work." Rebecca looked over his shoulder and saw that he was carving a small wooden box. The design was intricate, with flowers and vines decorating the lid. "Ben, it is beautiful. It is not finished yet. I wanted it to be perfect before I gave it to you, but I suppose the surprise is ruined now." She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "The surprise may be ruined, but I love it all the same. What is it for?" "I thought you could use it to store your treasures. Letters from Thomas, that sort of thing." The thoughtfulness of the gesture made her heart swell. "You are too good to me. Impossible. I could never be good enough for you." Thomas visited whenever he could, which turned out to be about once a month. He would make the journey up the mountain on his day off, always bringing news from town and supplies he thought they might need. Rebecca looked forward to these visits, eager to hear about her brother's life and to assure herself that he was doing well. Thomas seemed to be thriving in Reading. He talked enthusiastically about his apprenticeship, about the skills he was learning from Gustav. He had made friends in town and seemed to be settling into his new life. Rebecca was relieved and happy for him. On one visit in late autumn, Thomas arrived with a sly smile on his face. "I have something to tell you both," he announced over dinner. "What is it?" Rebecca asked. "There is a girl. Her name is Sarah Miller. Her family runs the general store in town." He ducked his head, looking suddenly shy. "I have been calling on her, and she seems to like me well enough." Rebecca squealed with delight. "Thomas, that is wonderful. Tell me about her." Thomas needed no further encouragement. He described Sarah in glowing terms, a young woman of 20 with blonde hair and a kind disposition. She helped her parents run the store and had a head for numbers. She also, Thomas added with a grin, made the best apple pie in the territory. "When do we get to meet her?" Ben asked. "Soon, I hope. I wanted to wait until I was sure it was serious before saying anything. But I think I might love her, Rebecca. Is that possible after only a few months?" Rebecca looked at Ben and smiled. "Yes, Thomas, it is absolutely possible." Winter came to the mountains in earnest, bringing snow that piled high against the cabin walls. Rebecca had been nervous about being snowed in, but Ben had prepared well. They had ample food preserved, plenty of firewood stacked against the cabin, and each other for company. Those winter months became some of the happiest of Rebecca's life. They spent long evenings by the fire, Ben reading aloud from his collection of books while Rebecca knitted or sewed. They played cards and chess, cooked elaborate meals just for fun, and made love under piles of quilts while the wind howled outside. Ben taught her to snowshoe so they could still move around when the snow was deep, and they explored the winter landscape together. Rebecca was awed by the stark beauty of the mountains under snow, the way everything seemed hushed and magical. One evening in January, as they sat by the fire, Rebecca felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She had been feeling slightly off for a few days but had attributed it to something she ate. Now, as the nausea intensified, a different possibility occurred to her. Ben noticed her distress immediately. "Rebecca, what is wrong? I am not sure. I feel unwell." He helped her to the bed and brought her water, concern written across his features. But as Rebecca lay there, counting back the weeks since her last monthly cycle, realization dawned. "Ben," she said slowly, "I think I might be with child." He froze, the cup of water halfway to her lips. "Truly, I think so. It would explain why I have been feeling this way." A smile spread across his face, growing until it was nearly blinding in its joy. He set down the cup carefully and took her hands. "We are going to have a baby. It appears so." Ben let out a whoop of joy that echoed through the cabin, then immediately looked contrite. "Sorry, I should not shout." "You are feeling ill. What do you need? What can I do?" His eagerness made her laugh despite her nausea. "You can start by breathing, my love, and perhaps help me sit up. I think some tea might settle my stomach." The months that followed were both challenging and wonderful. Rebecca's morning sickness lasted well into her 4th month, much to her frustration. Ben was endlessly patient, bringing her dry bread and ginger tea, holding her hair back when she was sick, never once complaining about the extra work. As spring arrived and her sickness finally abated, Rebecca bloomed. Her belly grew round with their child, and Ben could not seem to stop touching it, marveling at the life they had created together. He talked to her stomach constantly, telling the baby stories about the mountains, about their family, about how loved this child already was. Thomas visited in April and was overjoyed at the news. "I am going to be an uncle," he exclaimed, hugging Rebecca carefully. He had his own news as well. He had proposed to Sarah Miller and she had accepted. They planned to marry in June. "You must come down for the wedding," Thomas insisted. "Both of you. Sarah is eager to meet you and I want my sister there when I get married." Rebecca looked at Ben uncertainly. The baby was due in late August, and travel down the mountain in June should still be manageable. Ben seemed to read her thoughts. "Of course we will be there," he said. "We would not miss it." They made the journey to Reading in mid-June, taking it slow to accommodate Rebecca's condition. She rode a gentle mare Ben had purchased specifically for this purpose, while he walked alongside her, ready to help if needed. Reading had grown since they had last planned to visit it nearly a year ago. More businesses lined the main street, and there seemed to be people everywhere. After so long in the isolated mountains, Rebecca found the crowds overwhelming at first. Thomas met them at the edge of town and led them to a small house he had rented. "It is not much," he said, "but it is ours, mine and Sarah's once we are married." Sarah Miller turned out to be exactly as Thomas had described, a pretty young woman with a warm smile and an easy laugh. She welcomed Rebecca and Ben into her family's home for dinner, and Rebecca liked her immediately. It was clear that Sarah loved Thomas deeply, and that Thomas was equally devoted to her. The wedding was held at the small church in town, with half of Reading in attendance. Thomas was popular in the community, and Sarah's family was well respected. Rebecca sat in the front pew with Ben beside her, his hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. Watching her brother marry the woman he loved, Rebecca felt her eyes well with tears. So much had changed in the past year. They had left Kansas as orphans with nothing, desperate and afraid. Now Thomas had a wife and a trade, and she had Ben and a baby on the way. Life had given them both such unexpected gifts. After the ceremony, there was a reception with food and dancing. Rebecca could not dance in her condition, but she enjoyed watching others and visiting with the townspeople. Many of them were curious about the mysterious mountain man Ben Walsh, and he bore their questions with good humor. Gustav Peterson, Thomas's employer, sought them out specifically. The old blacksmith was a massive man with arms like tree trunks and a bushy white beard. "You are Rebecca," he said, shaking her hand gently. "Your brother talks of you constantly. I am glad to finally meet you, and I you. Thank you for giving Thomas his opportunity." Gustav waved off her thanks. "The boy has talent, he works hard and learns quick. In another year or two he will be as good a smith as any in Colorado." He turned to Ben. "And you are the one who saved them both. Thomas told me the story." "I only did what anyone would do," Ben said. "No, you did what a good man would do. There is a difference." Gustav clapped Ben on the shoulder, nearly staggering him despite Ben's size. "If you ever tire of mountain life and want to work in town, come see me. I could use a man of your strength in the forge." "I appreciate that," Ben replied, "but I think I am where I belong." "I thought you would say that, but the offer stands." They stayed in Reading for 3 days, long enough to see Thomas and Sarah settled into their new home. When it came time to return to the mountains, Rebecca found she was eager to go. Reading was nice enough, but it was not home. Home was a cabin in the wilderness, surrounded by pine trees and mountains, with the man she loved beside her. The journey back was slower than the journey down, as Rebecca was now 7 months along and easily tired. They stopped frequently to rest, and Ben insisted on making camp well before dark each day. His protectiveness had intensified as her pregnancy progressed, and while Rebecca sometimes found it excessive, she mostly found it endearing. Summer in the mountains was glorious. Rebecca spent her days preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, arranging the cradle Ben had built. He had made it from pine and carved animals into the headboard, each one exquisitely detailed. A bear, a deer, an eagle, a rabbit. Their child would sleep surrounded by the creatures of these mountains, the wildlife that would be part of their world. As August approached, Ben grew increasingly nervous. The nearest doctor was in Reading, hours away, and while Ben had delivered foals and calves, a human baby was different. Rebecca tried to reassure him, but truthfully she was nervous too. Women died in childbirth all the time. It was the reality of life in 1876. Ben prepared obsessively, reading every book on childbirth he could get his hands on, laying in supplies, even making a practice run to Reading and back to see how quickly he could make the journey if needed. Rebecca finally had to sit him down and take his hands. "Ben, you need to breathe. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine." "You do not know that," he said roughly. "Rebecca, if something happened to you, I could not bear it. You are everything to me." Her heart melted at the raw emotion in his voice. "Nothing is going to happen to me. I am strong and you are here. We will face this together just like we face everything." He pulled her close, careful of her belly, and held her tight. "I love you so much." "I love you too. Now please try to relax. You are making me nervous with all your worrying." Labor began on a warm afternoon in late August. Rebecca had been folding baby clothes when the first contraction hit, a tightening across her belly that made her gasp. Ben, who had been outside chopping wood, was by her side in seconds. "Is it time?" he asked, his face going pale. "I think so." What followed was the longest day of both their lives. Ben was amazing, staying calm despite his fear, helping Rebecca through each contraction, wiping her face with cool cloths, encouraging her when she grew tired. As the hours wore on and the pain intensified, Rebecca clung to his strength. "You can do this," he told her over and over. "You are the strongest person I know, just a little longer." Night fell and still the baby had not come. Rebecca was exhausted, her body trembling with effort. Ben held her hand and prayed, something he had not done since the war. He prayed to any god who might be listening to keep his wife safe, to bring their child safely into the world. Just before dawn, with the first birds beginning to sing outside, Rebecca gave a final push, and their baby entered the world. Ben caught the tiny, slippery body in his large hands, and for a moment he just stared in wonder. "Is it all right?" Rebecca gasped. "Ben, is the baby all right?" The infant took a breath and let out a lusty cry, and Ben laughed through tears. "We have a son," he said, his voice breaking. "Rebecca, we have a son, and he is perfect." He cleaned the baby quickly with the supplies they had prepared and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Rebecca's arms. She looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and beautiful beyond measure, and felt love crash over her like a wave. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Their son had a thick shock of dark hair like his father and his mother's delicate features. His eyes, when he opened them, were a deep blue that might change or might not. He was perfect. "What should we name him?" Ben asked, sitting beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Rebecca knew. "Jacob," she said, "after your father, Jacob Walsh." Ben's eyes filled with tears again. His father had died when Ben was young and the wound had never fully healed. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. Your father would be proud of the man you have become. It seems right to honor him this way." Ben kissed her softly, then kissed the top of Jacob's head. "Jacob Walsh, welcome to the world, my son." The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings. Jacob was a hungry baby, always eager to nurse, and Rebecca was perpetually exhausted. But she had never been happier. Watching Ben with their son was a revelation. He held Jacob as though he were made of glass, spoke to him in soft, soothing tones, would walk the cabin floor for hours if the baby was fussy. "You are a natural father," Rebecca told him one night, watching him rock Jacob to sleep. "I am terrified," Ben admitted. "I keep thinking of all the ways I could fail him, all the dangers in the world." "That is because you love him. But Ben, you could never fail him. You are too good a man for that." When Jacob was 6 weeks old, they bundled him up and made the journey to Reading so Thomas and Sarah could meet their nephew. The trip took longer with the baby, but Jacob was surprisingly good, sleeping for most of the journey. Thomas was besotted with Jacob the moment he saw him. "He looks just like you, Ben," same serious expression. Sarah held Jacob with the ease of someone who had grown up around babies, and Rebecca felt a pang of envy at how natural it looked. "He is beautiful," Sarah said. "You must be so proud." "We are," Rebecca replied, watching Ben watch their son. The love on his face made her heart ache in the best way. They stayed in Reading for a week this time, giving Rebecca a chance to rest and to visit with her brother. Sarah and Rebecca grew close during that time, and Rebecca was grateful to have another woman to talk to. Living on the mountain with only Ben for company was wonderful, but she had missed female friendship. On their last night in town, as they sat around Thomas and Sarah's dinner table, Sarah made an announcement. "I am with child," she said, her face glowing with happiness. "The baby should come in March." Rebecca jumped up to hug her sister-in-law, thrilled that their children would be close in age. "That is wonderful news." The cousins would grow up together, Rebecca thought. They would make the journey to town more frequently so the children could know each other. Family was too important to let distance erode it. The years that followed were full and rich. Jacob grew into a sturdy toddler, fearless and curious about everything. He loved the mountains as much as his father did, squealing with delight when Ben took him outside to show him deer or birds. Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Emma, and true to her plans, Rebecca made sure to visit Reading frequently so the cousins could play together. Thomas and Sarah visited the mountain when they could, though it was harder for them to get away. When Jacob was 3, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again. Their second child, a daughter they named Ruth, arrived the following spring. Ruth was smaller and quieter than Jacob had been, with Ben's gray eyes and a thoughtful disposition. Ben melted completely at the sight of his daughter, and Rebecca teased him mercilessly about being wrapped around Ruth's tiny finger. "I have no defense," Ben admitted, holding Ruth while she slept. "She owns me completely." Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The cabin sometimes felt small, but Ben was already planning an addition. He wanted to build another room to give the children space to grow. Rebecca could not have imagined being happier. Her days were full of cooking and cleaning and tending to children, but it was joyful work. She and Ben had built something real here, something lasting. They had created not just a home but a family, and that was worth more than all the gold in Colorado. Thomas and Sarah visited one fall day with surprising news. Gustav Peterson had decided to retire and had offered to sell Thomas the blacksmith business. It was an amazing opportunity, but the price was steep, more than Thomas had saved. "I hate to ask," Thomas said, looking uncomfortable, "but I wondered if you might lend me the money." "I would pay you back with interest, of course. It is just such a good opportunity, and Sarah and I do not want to let it pass by." Ben did not even hesitate. "Consider it done. No interest necessary. You are family, Thomas." "I cannot accept that without paying you back properly." "Then pay me back without interest. But I am doing this, Thomas. You helped your sister through the worst time of her life. You have been a good brother and a good friend. Let me help you now." Thomas's eyes went suspiciously bright. "Thank you, Ben. I do not know what to say." "Say you will make it a success. That is all the thanks I need." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Jacob grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet confidence. Ruth was more bookish, always asking questions and wanting to learn. When she was 5, Rebecca began teaching her to read, and Ruth took to it eagerly. Ben continued to trap and hunt, selling furs in Reading to support their family. Rebecca tended a large garden in the warmer months, preserving enough food to get them through the winters. It was hard work, but they were partners in everything, and the work felt lighter when shared. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Ben gave Rebecca a gift that made her cry. It was a dress, beautiful and impractical, made from silk the color of emeralds. She had no idea where he had gotten it or how much it had cost. "Ben, it is too much," she protested. "Nothing is too much for you. I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that is just yours." He kissed her gently. "You gave up so much to be with me, Rebecca. A comfortable life in town, society, other women to talk to. The least I can do is give you a pretty dress." "I did not give up anything," Rebecca said firmly. "I chose this life because it is the one I wanted. You and our children, this mountain. This is everything I could ever need. Still, wear the dress for me." She did that evening and felt like a girl again. Ben looked at her as though seeing her for the first time, and the passion in his eyes made her breath catch. They danced in the cabin, with no music but what Rebecca hummed, and it was perfect. That night, after the children were asleep, they made love with the same intensity as newlyweds. Rebecca marveled at how Ben could still make her heart race after 5 years, how his touch could still ignite fire in her blood. "I love you," she whispered as they lay together afterward. "More than I thought it was possible to love another person." "I love you too," Ben replied, pulling her close. "You are my everything, Rebecca Walsh. Never doubt that." Another child came, a son they named Daniel, and then 2 years later another daughter named Grace. The cabin felt full to bursting with 4 children, and Ben finally built the addition he had been planning. Now there were 2 bedrooms for the children, with Jacob and Daniel in one and Ruth and Grace in the other. Rebecca sometimes thought back to that day when she had been carrying Thomas through the mountains, exhausted and terrified and certain they would die. If someone had told her then that she would end up here, married to a mountain man and mother to 4 children, she would never have believed them. Life had given her such unexpected gifts. Thomas's blacksmith business thrived under his ownership. He hired apprentices of his own and became known throughout the region for quality work. He and Sarah had 3 more children after Emma, and family gatherings were loud, chaotic, wonderful affairs. On one such gathering, when Rebecca was 30 years old and had been married to Ben for 11 years, Thomas pulled her aside. "I was thinking about that day," he said quietly, "when I was sick and you were carrying me through the mountains. Do you remember?" "Of course I remember." "I was terrified. I was barely conscious, but I remember bits and pieces. I remember you talking to me, begging me to hold on. I remember thinking that if I died, you would be alone in the world." He squeezed her hand. "I am so grateful we both survived. Look at what we have built, Rebecca. Look at our families." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "We have been blessed, truly. We have. And it all started because Ben Walsh was in the right place at the right time, and because he was the kind of man who would not walk past someone in need." Rebecca looked across the yard to where Ben was tossing Grace in the air, making her shriek with laughter. Jacob was helping Daniel climb a tree while Ruth sat nearby reading. Her family, her life. "He saved us both that day," she said softly. "But I think in some ways, Thomas, we saved him too. He was so alone before we came. Now look at him." Thomas smiled. "You are good for each other. That is how it should be." The years continued their steady march. The children grew older, more independent. Jacob began accompanying Ben on hunting trips, learning the ways of the mountains. Ruth devoured every book they could get her hands on and talked about becoming a teacher someday. Daniel was the wild one, always climbing trees or chasing animals, while Grace was the peacemaker, smoothing over conflicts between her siblings. Rebecca's hair began to show threads of silver, and Ben's beard went gray at the temples. But the love between them remained as strong as ever. If anything, it had deepened with time, growing roots as thick and strong as the pines that surrounded their home. One evening, with the children finally all asleep, Rebecca sat beside Ben on the porch and looked up at the stars. The mountain night was clear and cold, with a billion stars visible overhead. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up your solitude? Ben was quiet for a moment, considering. There are moments when the cabin feels too small and the noise too loud, he admitted. But regret? Never. Before you came, I was not truly alive. I was just existing, hiding from the world. You and our children brought me back to life. You did the same for me. That day you found us, I thought my life was over. I thought Thomas would die and I would be completely alone. Instead, you gave me a future I could not have imagined. Ben pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, listening to the night sounds of the forest, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through the trees. I think I am the luckiest man alive, Ben said eventually. That makes two of us, Rebecca replied. Well, luckiest woman anyway. He laughed, that deep, rumbling laugh she loved so much. Shall we make a bet on which of us is luckier? I already know I would win. How do you figure? Because I got you, Rebecca said simply. And there is no greater luck than that. Ben kissed the top of her head, holding her close. Above them, the stars wheeled on in their eternal dance, bearing witness to a love that had started with an act of kindness and grown into something unshakable. Years passed in the gentle rhythm of mountain life. Jacob grew into a young man as tall as his father and nearly as strong, with a gift for working with wood. He built furniture to sell in Reading, his craftsmanship earning him a reputation. At 22, he married a young woman named Charlotte from town, and they built a cabin not far from Ben and Rebecca's, choosing to stay close to family. Ruth fulfilled her dream of becoming a teacher, taking a position at the small school in Reading. She boarded in town during the week and came home on weekends, always full of stories about her students. She was courted by several young men, but Rebecca suspected her independent daughter would choose carefully, unwilling to settle for anything less than the kind of love her parents shared. Daniel, at 17, talked about heading further west, about seeing the ocean. Ben understood the wanderlust better than most and did not try to discourage him, though Rebecca worried about her adventurous son heading off into the unknown. Grace, at 15, was becoming a beauty with her father's gray eyes and her mother's delicate features. She helped Rebecca with the household work and talked about opening a dress shop someday. Rebecca had been teaching her to sew, and the girl had real talent. Rebecca was 42 years old now, and Ben was nearing 50. His hair and beard had gone fully gray, and there were lines on his face that had not been there when they met. But he was still strong, still capable, still the mountain of a man who had swept her off her feet all those years ago. Thomas came to visit one spring day with news that stunned them all. He had been elected mayor of Reading. The town had grown considerably over the years, and Thomas's reputation as a fair, hard-working man had made him a natural choice for leadership. Mayor Thomas Vaughn, Rebecca said, shaking her head in wonder. Our parents would have been so proud. I wish they could have seen all of this, Thomas replied. The life we have built, I think they would have been happy. I know they would have been. That summer, the family gathered for a massive reunion. All of Thomas and Sarah's children came, along with their growing families. Jacob and Charlotte brought their baby daughter. The mountain rang with laughter and conversation, with the sound of children playing and adults catching up. Rebecca stood on the porch watching it all and felt Ben's arms come around her from behind. She leaned back against his solid warmth, content. How did we get so lucky? She mused. Luck had nothing to do with it, Ben replied. This is what happens when you refuse to give up, when you keep walking even when you can barely stand. You stumbled into my life, Rebecca Walsh, and I have been grateful every day since. I love you, she said, turning in his arms to look up at him. His gray eyes were soft as they looked down at her, full of a love that time had only strengthened. And I love you, always. They kissed, surrounded by the sound of their family, their legacy. 4 children and now grandchildren, with more surely to come. A cabin in the mountains that had become a home. A love story that had started with a desperate woman carrying her sick brother and a lonely mountain man who chose to help. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Rebecca thought about how life had a funny way of working out. She had set out for Redding all those years ago looking for work, for a way to survive. Instead, she had found love, family, and a home in the wilderness. Ben had found his path after the war, seeking solitude and peace in the mountains. But he had been incomplete, only half alive, until the day he saw a young woman stumbling under the weight of her sick brother and made the choice to help. 2 broken people who found each other and became whole. That was their story, and it was better than any fairy tale. The years continued their patient march. Rebecca and Ben grew older together, silver turning to white, bodies moving more slowly but hearts still beating as one. They became grandparents many times over, the cabin always full of visiting family. Jacob and Charlotte had 4 children. Ruth eventually married a merchant from Denver and had twins. Daniel returned from his adventures and married a rancher's daughter, settling not far from the rest of the family. Grace opened her dress shop in Redding and became known for her beautiful designs. Thomas served 3 terms as mayor of Redding before retiring to spend more time with his ever-growing family. He and Ben remained close friends, as they had been since that first meeting when Thomas was sick with fever and Ben had saved his life. "You remember carrying me to the cabin?" Thomas asked one day, the 2 old men sitting on the porch in rocking chairs Ben had made. "Of course. You were burning up with fever. I was not sure you would make it. I remember feeling Rebecca carrying me and thinking she was going to kill herself trying to save me. She was always stubborn like that." Thomas smiled. "Then I remember these strong arms lifting me up and thinking maybe we would be all right after all. I could not leave you there. What kind of man would I be if I had just walked past, a lesser one than you are, my friend? You saved both of us that day, whether you realize it or not." Ben was quiet for a moment. "You are wrong about that. Rebecca saved me. I was half dead up here just going through the motions. She brought me back to life. Then I would say you saved each other. That is how the best partnerships work." On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the mountain cabin. There were so many people they spilled out of the house and into the yard, 3 generations of family that had sprung from that chance meeting on a mountain trail. Rebecca stood with Ben, his arm around her waist, and looked at the assembled crowd. Her children and grandchildren, Thomas and his family, all of them healthy and happy and together. Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of pure joy. Speech. Someone called and others took up the cry. Ben raised his hand for quiet and the crowd settled. When he spoke, his voice was still strong despite his age. 30 years ago, I was alone on this mountain, convinced I wanted nothing to do with the world. Then I saw a young woman carrying her sick brother, refusing to give up even though she could barely stand. That woman was Rebecca, and helping her was the best decision I ever made." He pulled Rebecca closer. "She gave me everything. A home, a family, a reason to live. Every day with her has been a gift I did not deserve but am grateful for." He turned to look down at her. "Rebecca Walsh, you are the love of my life. Thank you for 30 wonderful years. Here is to 30 more." The family cheered and applauded. Rebecca stood on her toes to kiss her husband, this mountain of a man who had saved her life and won her heart. When they parted, she took her turn to speak. "When I was 19 years old, carrying my sick brother through these mountains, I thought my life was ending. Instead, it was just beginning. Ben Walsh, You are my hero, my partner, my everything. These 30 years have been the greatest adventure, and I would not change a single moment." More cheers, more applause. The celebration lasted long into the night, with food and music and laughter echoing through the mountains. Rebecca danced with Ben, slower than they used to but no less heartfelt, and felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt on their wedding day. Some love stories start with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Theirs had started with a simple act of kindness, a strong man lifting up two people who could not carry themselves any further. From that small beginning had grown something vast and beautiful, a love that had weathered every storm and only grown stronger. As the stars came out above the mountain peaks, Rebecca leaned against Ben and sighed with contentment. She was 63 years old now, her hair white and her body bearing the marks of age and hard work. But she had never felt more beautiful than when Ben looked at her with those storm-gray eyes full of love. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "Not a single one," Rebecca replied. "You?" "Only that I did not find you sooner," she laughed. "We found each other at exactly the right time. Everything happened the way it was meant to." They stood together watching their family, watching the legacy they had built together. 4 children who had grown into good adults, grandchildren running around with the same joy for life that their parents had shown. A family business thriving in town, a home in the mountains that had sheltered them through decades of storms. Thomas came to join them, his own hair white now, his body bent slightly with age, but his smile was the same as it had been at 19. "Hard to believe it has been 30 years, he said. "Seems like yesterday I was sick in your bed and you two were dancing around your feelings for each other." "We were not dancing," Rebecca protested. "You absolutely were. It was painful to watch, honestly. I wanted to knock your heads together and make you admit you were in love." Ben laughed. "We got there eventually." "That you did." Thomas looked out at the assembled family. "Look at what we have built, all of us. We came to Colorado with nothing, and now look." "We are blessed," Rebecca agreed. The three of them stood together as the celebration continued around them, 3 people whose lives had intersected on a mountain trail and become forever intertwined. Rebecca thought about the young woman she had been, desperate and afraid but determined to save her brother. She thought about the lonely mountain man who had been hiding from life. She thought about her brother, who had been at death's door but fought his way back. They had all been saved that day in different ways. And from that saving had come all of this joy, all this love, all these lives that would never have existed if Ben had simply walked past them on the trail. As Rebecca grew older still, she made sure to write down their story. She wanted her grandchildren and great-grandchildren to know how it had all started, how a simple act of kindness had changed the course of so many lives. She wrote about carrying Thomas through the mountains, about Ben lifting them both effortlessly, about falling in love in a cabin surrounded by wilderness. She wrote about the struggles and the joys, the births and the celebrations, the quiet moments and the grand adventures. She wrote it all down so that future generations would understand that love can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept help when you need it most. Ben read her words and declared them perfect. "You have captured it exactly as it was," he said, kissing her temple. "Our story." "It is a good story," Rebecca agreed, "and the best part is that it is all true." They lived to see great-grandchildren, tiny babies who would grow up hearing stories about the mountain man who had swept their great-grandmother off her feet. They lived to celebrate 50 years of marriage, an occasion that brought the family together once more in an even larger gathering than before. Rebecca was 71 on that day, Ben nearing 80. Both moved slowly now, their bodies bearing the weight of decades. But their love remained as fierce and true as it had been on that first day. 50 years, Rebecca marveled as they cut the cake their granddaughters had made. Half a century, Ben. Best 50 years of my life, he replied. That night, after everyone had gone home or bedded down in various corners of the now much expanded cabin, Rebecca and Ben sat on their porch one last time. The mountain air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. "You ever think about that day?" Rebecca asked. "The day you found us. All the time. I think about how close I came to taking a different trail that day. If I had gone left instead of right, I never would have seen you. Our whole lives would have been different. But you did go right. Fate or luck or divine intervention, you were exactly where you needed to be." "I believe that," Ben said quietly. "I believe we were meant to find each other, Rebecca. Some things are just destined." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, two old people who had lived a full and beautiful life together. The stars wheeled overhead just as they had on countless other nights, eternal and unchanging. When Ben finally stood, he held out his hand to Rebecca. "Come to bed, wife. I am tired." She took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. Even at 80, he was still strong enough to support her, still protective of her well-being. Some things never changed. They went inside together, to the bedroom they had shared for 50 years, and lay down side by side. Ben pulled Rebecca close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he replied. "Always and forever." They drifted off to sleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and Rebecca thought there could be no better way to end a day or to end a life. They had built something beautiful together, something that would last long after they were gone. Their legacy was not just in the children and grandchildren who would carry on after them, though that was part of it. Their legacy was also in the love they had shown each other, the commitment they had demonstrated through decades of challenges and triumphs. They had proven that love could survive anything if you chose it every day, if you worked at it and treasured it and never took it for granted. Ben passed first, in his sleep at the age of 83, his hand still clasped in Rebecca's. She woke to find him gone and wept, but there was peace in her grief. They had been granted so much time together, so much love. She could not be angry about that. Rebecca lived for 3 more years, surrounded by her family, telling stories about the mountain man who had saved her and her brother all those decades ago. She told the children about his strength and his gentleness, about his laugh and his thoughtfulness, about how he had made her feel like the most precious thing in the world. "Never settle for anything less," she told her granddaughters. "Find someone who looks at you the way your grandfather looked at me, someone who will lift you up when you cannot walk another step. That is real love." When Rebecca finally passed at the age of 74, she was laid to rest beside Ben on the mountain they had both loved so much. The funeral brought together family from across Colorado and beyond. 3 generations gathering to say goodbye to the woman who had been the heart of their family. On her headstone, beneath her name and dates, were carved simple words that captured her entire life. Rebecca Walsh, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She never gave up and love found her. The cabin remained in the family, passed down through the generations. Jacob's children inherited it, and they maintained it lovingly, making sure it stood as a testament to where their family had begun. Visitors would come to hear the story, to see where it had all started. They would stand on the porch and look out at the mountains and imagine a young woman stumbling through the wilderness with her sick brother on her back. They would picture a mountain man emerging from the trees, strong enough to lift them both. They would envision love blooming in this isolated place, against all odds, And every time the story was told, it ended the same way, with Ben lifting both Rebecca and Thomas, carrying them to safety, and in doing so, carrying them all toward a future full of love and family and joy. One act of kindness that rippled out across decades, touching countless lives. That was the legacy of Benjamin and Rebecca Walsh. Not just a love story, but proof that choosing compassion, choosing to help when it would be easier to walk away, can change everything. They had both been broken when they found each other, both in desperate need of saving. And they had saved each other, building a life together that was worth more than gold. Years turned to decades, and the story became legend in Reading. The mountain man and his bride, the great love affair that had started with a rescue. People would point out Thomas Vaughn's descendants, noting that he would not have existed to have that family if not for Ben Walsh's strong arms and kind heart. The cabin stood for 100 years and more, eventually becoming a historic site that tourists would visit. They would walk through the rooms where 4 children had been raised, where love had flourished despite the harsh conditions. They would read the journal Rebecca had kept, her words bringing to life a world long past, and somewhere in whatever comes after this life, Ben and Rebecca walked together still, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. They had earned their happily ever after through decades of choosing each other, and death could not diminish what they had built. Their story lived on, generation after generation, a reminder that love can be found in the most unexpected places. That strength comes in many forms: the physical strength to carry someone to safety, but also the emotional strength to open your heart after trauma, to trust again, to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. Benjamin Walsh saw a woman carrying her sick brother, and he lifted them both and brought them to his cabin. From that single choice came a love that lasted a lifetime, a family that spread across Colorado, and a story that would be told for generations. It was, in the end, more than just a rescue. It was a beginning, the beginning of everything that mattered.